Hello everyone, this is Kevin Zhao, your finance professor at MTSU. In this short video, we'll go through the very last chapter for this week, terminal value. This is the short chapter, therefore this video will be pretty short. What is terminal value? Terminal value is the value during the second stage in your FCFE model or FCFF model or even DDM model. And during this stage, the growth rate will decline to a normal number, typically a low number, 5%, 3%. That's pretty normal. And this constant growth time period will go indefinitely, and the value during this second stage is called a terminal value. There are three ways to estimating terminal value, and previously we used the stable growth model to estimate terminal value, but this is not the only way. And it's getting more popular for financial analysts to use a multiple approach to estimate terminal value. It's a very different approach, and here, for example, you can use PE ratio, PB ratio as basis for your estimation. As long as you have the future earnings estimation for constant growth time period, then you can use multiple approach. Let's say PE ratio, a reasonable PE ratio times the future expected EPS to get future expected net income, and based on net income you can estimate the future free cash flow to equity or future free cash flow to firm to get this terminal value. And the last method is liquidation value. Liquidation value assuming that the company will stop operating, and you use the liquidation value to estimate this terminal value. But this liquidation value method is less common because most companies will go forward. Now let's take a look at a very key issue in determining terminal value, that is growth rate estimation. Because the terminal value equals expected cash flow at the beginning year of the constant growth time period, then divided by the difference between cost of equity and the growth rate. And typically this growth rate is low. It's ridiculous for you to set this growth rate as a double-digit number. Typically it's a low number, 3%, 5%, 4.5%. But what's the best number for to use? And here the theory says that you look at the long-term growth rate of the economy, and the stable growth rate should be a number that is slightly lower than growth rate of the economy. That's the one opinion on how to find this G, and that's a good foundation for you to find this G. You look at the long-term growth rate of the economy. However, for different industry and a different company, you may have different numbers for this growth rate, and for smaller company, for growth company, the constant growth rate could be slightly greater than this growth rate of the economy. But the growth rate of the economy is something that you want to look at. So how do you find the growth rate of the economy? That's another issue. Some people say, hey, long-term growth rate of the economy could be 3%, 5%, but it really depends. First one is the real growth rate of the economy. Second one is expected inflation rate. So if you estimate that future real growth economy equals 1% plus 2% expected inflation rate, then the nominal growth rate of the economy would be 3%. And given that you're evaluating a small growth company, this company is well managed, and the growth rate could be slightly higher than this one, let's say 3.5% or even 4%. So that would be a reasonable estimation of the growth rate. But anyway, it's not a number that you can randomly put there 5%, 3%, because it will generate a huge difference in terminal value. Right? 5% versus 3%, the difference is not small. It would be huge. Even 50 basis points difference in growth rate will lead to large difference in your stock price valuation. So you need to be very careful on this number. Rationally, you look at three factors. First one is the long-term economic growth rate, real economic growth rate, and the second, the expected inflation rate, and third, the unique firm's characteristics. Let's say small company, growth company, or well-managed company may have high growth rates in the terminal time period. Now, before you determine this terminal value, you wanted to make decision on how long for you to set that high growth time period. And many people say, hey, you have many choices, less than 5 years, 5 years, 10 years, or even greater than 10 years. Which one will you pick? Which one will you pick for a young, high growth company with great potential just after its IPO? Some people say, hey, for small company, for young company, well, it may experience high growth for the next 10 or even 20 years. Is that realistic expectation? I would say no. Most people will use 5 years. Why 5 years? Not 7, 10, even greater than 10 years. I can show you the evidence. What about the high growth time period we use for large firm with a proven track record of delivering growth in the past? Would that be 5, 10, 15, or even longer? In this case, I still use 5 years. The reason that I use 5 years is because I look at the source of growth for large company. Large company on average doesn't grow a lot. However, during a typical business cycle, when economy goes from trough to peak, the company may experience a significant growth for certain time period during a business cycle. So let's say a business cycle lasts for 10 years, then the expansion could last for 5 years. Then 5 years would be the number of years for this high growth time period. So in your two-stage model, it's very common for you to see a lot of people use 5 years as high growth time period. Is that reasonable? Is that arbitrarily set a number or what? And I think empirical evidence showing that 5 years is a pretty reasonable choice. You may choose 7 years, but if you choose longer than 7 years or less than 5 years, then you need to think about that twice. 5 years is pretty good, although it's not 100% accurate or the best one, but 5 years is pretty reasonable. Now here's the evidence why even for small young companies, setting 5 years high growth rate time period would be reasonable, because the evidence showing that in this picture you show that after 5 years the axis growth for the small young company relative to industry average actually diminish year by year very quickly after IPO. In the first year after IPO, the average growth rate, axis growth rate would be a 2-digit number. If industry average 5%, then for the first year, IPO company growth rate would be 20%. But this number declined very drastically in the following 5 years, as you see from the picture shown on the right. It declined from 15% to 0, basically 0 in just 5 years. It declines pretty quickly. So that's why if you use a 5-year high growth time period, even for small young company, that is a pretty reasonable choice. And the last issue is about looking at this growth rate. And previously, what I say about this terminal time period growth rate should be a number close to the long-term economic growth rate, nominal rates, real growth plus inflation plus some premium if it's a small growth company or well-managed company. That's one method that you use to estimate that growth. But fundamentally, you also need to look at the bottom up or fundamental factors determining the growth. The growth in this constant growth time period still need to be earned. How can company get the growth in this constant growth time period? There are only two ways. First one is reinvest. Companies still need to reinvest invest to satisfy increasing demand from the growth of the economy. Right? So in this equation, you see that terminal growth rate equals reinvestment rate times return on reinvested capital. You need to look at a reinvestment because reinvestment is the only source for company to generate growth. And the second is growth rate from improved efficiency. But if company need to improve efficiency of the operation, very likely the company also need to make significant reinvestment. Right? And the reinvestment rate is critical here to determine growth. And if you set a certain growth rate for a certain company, then you can double check if company can achieve a certain level of investment. Make sure your assumption is realistic. Right? So that is growth rate. And second equation show you that reinvestment rate is a function of the growth rate and the return on capital. If a company has certain goal for its long-term growth, then companies still need to reinvest. But here you needed to know how much the company needed to reinvest, because when you need to estimate free cash flow to equity and free cash flow to the firm, you needed to incorporate this investment rate. So fundamentally, you need to pay great attention to the consistency between reinvestment and the growth rate that you set in your terminal value estimation. And another one more issue here is for certain companies, although those companies could be a mature company, large cap company, it seems that company doesn't have great potential to grow. However, when you look at their history, you find that those so-called mature, large, blue chip companies can still experience high number of growth in the longer term, such as Nike, such as BMW. I mean, those companies exist for like 100 years already. But somehow you can see that growth rate, historical growth rate, is not 3, 5, or 3%. It's 7, 8%, even double digit during certain economic expansion time period. So for well-managed company, you really wanted to look at their historical record. If there's historical record showing that long-term growth rate is 7, 8%, don't hesitate to use that high number. Although your estimated long-term economic growth is just 2 or 3%. Right, so that is a short chapter of this terminal value estimation, and we are approaching the end of the third week. At this point, I want to remind you that although segment exam is not due next week, but you should be able to work on first 5 or 6 questions regarding valuation models, DDM, FCFF, and FCFE. You really need to spend more time on your second exam than you did in your first exam, because every problem solving may ask you to spend 40 or 50 minutes. As you see in one of my video demonstration on question 3 in chapter 14, the video lasted about 40 minutes. So if you're spending a little over 1 hour solving one problem, you are not alone. Everybody are doing the same thing here, and the more time you invest in this exam, take-home exam problem solving, the more that you can get away from this class, because exam questions offer you great opportunities to apply what you learn in the class to address those details in stock valuation problems. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next week.